Let us turn the pages of the oldest records to times before memory, before empire, before even the first starships carried mankind to the stars, to a secret buried so deep it has become part of the rock itself, to the origin of the Golden Throne. The Golden Throne did not begin its existence beneath the Emperor's palace. It was not crafted by the hands of modern man. No tech priest can truly claim ownership over its design. It predates them all. It is, in truth, a relic from the dark age of technology, that ancient epoch when mankind ruled the stars not as scattered children, but as masters of all that could be seen. It was an era of unimaginable scientific advancement, of machine intelligences, of stellar engineering, and of psychic awakening. And it was from that long-forgotten height that the device we now call the Golden Throne was born. None alive today fully understand who made it or why. Not even the Emperor himself has spoken the complete truth of its origin. Some say it was designed by mankind's techno-magi to breach the barrier between dimensions. Others claim it was an early experiment in psychic manipulation or a prototype of warp-proof travel. There are even whispers that it was not made by mankind at all, but stolen from Xenos who were far older. Its true creators are shadows lost to ancient history. When the Emperor walked the war-torn wastes of Terra during the Age of Strife, he scoured the ruins of ancient civilization for what little remained of mankind's forgotten power. Beneath the Himalayan mountains, buried within the ancient vaults, he discovered the shattered remnants of the device. Its frame was broken. Its interfaces were locked behind languages that no living human could read. But even damaged, the machine pulsed with dormant power. And as he laid his hands upon its golden structure, the Emperor recognized its potential. It was no throne in those days. It was a husk of circuitry, a ruined colossus of gold and crystal laced with dormant systems built upon principles lost to man. But its core had survived. Its ancient purpose had been clear to him alone. The Emperor saw in it not only a machine, but a key to humanity's salvation. The Age of Strife had already torn mankind apart. Warp storms raged across the galaxy. Civilizations were isolated and broken. The Psyker gene had begun to awaken uncontrollably in the human race, drawing demons and warp entities into real space. The warp itself hungered for mankind's soul. The Emperor foresaw that unless a lasting solution was found, humanity would be consumed entirely by the forces of chaos. And so, he began his great work. In secret beneath the mountains, the Emperor gathered his finest savants, his gene-forged artisans, his proto-mechanicum adepts. Using both science and psychic might, they slowly began to repair, repurpose, and reshape the ancient machine. What had once been a gateway or a beacon was transformed into something far more ambitious. The Emperor's plan was simple in concept, but terrifying in its scope. He intended to build a direct link into the webway, that ancient extra-dimensional labyrinth used by the Eldar to bypass the warp entirely. With the Golden Throne as the anchor point, humanity could have its own webway network, immune to the predators of the warp. There would be no need for navigators, no vulnerability to demonic corruption, no warp storms to trap humanity's fleets. A new era of safe, instantaneous travel would be born, built upon the ruins of forgotten science. For years, perhaps decades, the Emperor labored in secrecy. While his armies fought across Terra and then across the stars, he returned always to his subterranean forge, perfecting the throne. Entire generations of artisans lived and died without ever fully understanding what they built. Crystalline psychocircuitry was grown rather than manufactured. Complex power matrices, capable of sustaining and amplifying vast psychic output, were installed. Warp suppressive pylons, stabilized through principles known only to the Emperor, lined the chamber. The deeper layers of the throne's systems interfaced directly with reality itself. In the heart of the mechanism, a gateway engine was installed, a dimensional aperture to connect the throne's chamber directly to the webway itself. Not through sorcery, but through science, ancient, refined, and far beyond what even Mars could replicate. The Golden Throne was no mere psychic amplifier. It was a breach point between realities, and it was the cornerstone of a plan to liberate humanity from the warp entirely. But the task was monstrous. The webway was treacherous, its pathways twisted and fragmented since the fall of the Eldar. Though the Emperor's engineers succeeded in stabilizing their local section beneath Terra, each step deeper into the webway's maze revealed new dangers. Warp entities sensed the intrusion. Demons prowled the boundaries, and the webway itself, a construct of ancient alien minds, resisted intrusion from crude human hands. The Golden Throne grew larger and more complex as new functions were added to safeguard against failure. Immense containment doors were constructed behind it, doors large enough to block entire armies of demons should the worst happen. Psychic regulators were linked directly to the Emperor's own mind, binding his will to the throne's functions. All of it hidden beneath the surface of Terra, where none but the Emperor's closest agents were permitted to tread. And still, it was not enough. The Golden Throne, for all its magnificence, could not function on its own. The Emperor knew that in the end, it would require not only machinery, but a mind of unspeakable strength, his mind, to stabilize the portal. It was not a machine built to serve a man. It was a machine built to be mastered by one. In secret, some of his most loyal followers whispered of the scale of the Emperor's vision, that the Golden Throne was only one part of a much grander design, that he was preparing not just a throne for his rule, but a future in which mankind would transcend the warp entirely, evolve into a psychic race under his direct guidance, and banish the gods of chaos forever. The throne was to be the keystone of humanity's ascension, a final safeguard against the long night. And so the Golden Throne was born, a machine older than memory, repurposed by a mind greater than any before or since, the ultimate artifact of both lost technology and newfound ambition. Even now, 10,000 years later, we kneel before it in awe and in ignorance. Its true origins are forgotten by most, but those who dare to study the hidden archives know this truth, that the Golden Throne was not built by the Imperium, but by a civilization far older. It was found, it was claimed, and it became humanity's last hope and its greatest prison. In the vastness of his design, the Emperor of mankind saw not just the Imperium that would come, but the threats that would rise to consume it. The warp was not merely a tool for him, it was a festering wound upon reality. And so, while his legions brought planets to heal and the Great Crusade reshaped the stars, he turned his greatest effort not to war, but to the work that few would ever witness, the transformation of the Golden Throne into something never before seen in the galaxy. The throne, in its original form, was a relic of the dark age of technology. That much was known only to a select few. But what it would become was entirely his own vision. It was not enough to simply restore it. The machine had to be repurposed, upgraded, and empowered to fulfill a destiny it had never originally been designed for. It would be reborn as the key to his final plan, the Webway Project. The Emperor understood what few others did, that the warp itself could never be tamed, only avoided. The navigators whose mutations allowed them to see through its roiling tides were a temporary solution. Psychers, unpredictable and vulnerable, were tools of necessity but also potential liabilities. The Eldar had proven that even the most sophisticated use of psychic power could eventually lead to catastrophe. And the ruinous powers, the gods of chaos, watched humanity's every move, hungering for its soul. The only true answer was to step outside of their reach entirely. To do that, he needed a doorway into the webway. The webway was not the warp. It was older, more stable, and almost entirely cut off from the predations of demons. It was the secret highway of the Eldar, a vast artificial realm of interlacing pathways that bypassed real space and avoided the warp entirely. But it had weaknesses. The Eldar's webway was fragmenting. Entire sections were lost, corrupted, or collapsing under the weight of the Eldar's own ancient sins. For mankind to use it, the Emperor would have to build a new access point, a secured, isolated gate from which humanity could begin constructing its own webway network. This is where the true genius of the Golden Throne was revealed. The machine's psychic amplifiers, dimensional stabilizers, and anti-warp technologies made it the perfect anchor for such a gateway. But its ancient systems were insufficient. The throne was never meant to interface directly with the webway's intricate lattice of corridors. It had to be fundamentally rewritten, not merely repaired. Deep beneath the Imperial Palace, shielded from prying eyes, the Emperor personally oversaw every aspect of the reconstruction. Teams of artisans, gene-crafted workers, and tech priests labored in silence. But none among them were permitted to see the entire design. Each served their narrow task without understanding the greater whole. Only the Emperor himself saw the full picture, weaving together their work with his own power. He introduced systems that no mortal mind could fully comprehend. Psychocircuitry lattices were grown in controlled chambers, grown like living crystals that could channel the unimaginable power of his mind. These structures were more organic than mechanical, crystalline brains capable of adapting and recalibrating the flow of psychic energy. Vast stabilizer rings were forged from adamantium, and materials whose names have been lost, embedded with sigils drawn from esoteric sources, not superstition, but hyper-advanced sciences dating back to when humanity still conversed with the machine intelligences of the Men of Iron. But even that was not enough. At the heart of the throne, the Emperor embedded a dimensional regulator, a gateway engine, designed to breach the webway without fully rupturing the membrane between realities. The calculations required to do so were so complex that no modern mechanicus priest would dare attempt them today. The Emperor solved equations that would have driven lesser minds into madness, creating algorithms that allowed the throne to map the webway's unstable corridors and open a safe path. The power source for this endeavor was equally extraordinary. Ordinary reactors were insufficient. Fusion, plasma, even antimatter could not sustain the throne's demands. Instead, the Emperor incorporated esoteric power cores, perhaps linked to ancient zero-point energy fields or gravitational manipulation devices recovered from long-lost human colonies. Their true origin remains a secret known only to the Emperor, and perhaps the Sigillite. Every contingency was accounted for. The throne's containment fields were layered with psychic dampeners capable of resisting even catastrophic breaches. The physical gateway chamber behind the throne, the great portal itself, was sealed with a pair of titanic adamantine gates, engraved with unbreakable sigils of reality anchoring. These gates were large enough that even a god engine of the Collegia Titanica might pass through them. But when shut, they would resist even the combined fury of a demonic legion. And always, the Emperor calculated, not only did the throne have to open the webway, but it had to resist corruption, invasion, and the ever-present pull of the warp itself. He understood that once the breach was created, the denizens of the Imperium would inevitably attempt to seize it. The throne was not built to function autonomously. No machine, however advanced, could fully stabilize the dimensional interface alone. It was designed to work in concert with a being of immense psychic strength. Only the Emperor, or perhaps one of his lost gene sons, who may have been bred for this very role, could fully command the throne's complex systems. Its operation required not simply technical knowledge, but the force of a godlike will. Even as the Great Crusade expanded, the Emperor returned again and again to his secret workshop beneath the mountain. Every victory bought him more time. Every world brought into compliance delayed the final confrontation with chaos. But even as worlds were conquered, the Emperor's true war was being fought here, in silence, in shadow, where none could see. Every moment not spent leading the crusade was dedicated to perfecting the throne's systems, recalibrating psychic conduits, refining dimensional stabilizers, and testing new failsafes. Very few outside his closest circle knew the full truth. Even among the Primarchs, most were ignorant of the Golden Throne's true purpose. They saw only that their father had withdrawn from the crusade and handed authority to bureaucrats and regents. To many, this was a source of confusion and resentment. But to the Emperor, secrecy was essential. The Webway project was too dangerous to be exposed. A single leak, a single spy, and the ruinous powers would descend upon it with full fury. There were whispers even then. Whispers that the Emperor's true plan was not merely to preserve humanity, but to shepherd its evolution into something greater. A race of controlled, stable psychers, shielded from chaos within the Webway's walls, elevated under his eternal rule. The throne was not just a machine, it was a foundation for humanity's final destiny. But history, as we know, would take another path. Before the Webway project could be completed, disaster struck. Though that tale belongs to another record, what matters is that the Golden Throne, even in its unfinished state, stood as a fusion of ancient mastery and the Emperor's unmatched vision. A hybrid of lost technology and psychic dominance, it was unlike any device ever built before or since. It was not simply a throne, it was a weapon, a prison, a key, a dream, and above all else, it was humanity's last, best hope. Beneath the surface of Terra lies a labyrinth that few in the Imperium even know exists, let alone understand. While the wars of unification raged above and the Great Crusade stretched across the stars, a second war was being waged far below the mountains of the Himalayas. A war not of guns and blades, but of science, will, and vision. Here, the Emperor's most secret work unfolded, the monumental construction and transformation of the Golden Throne's chamber. When the Emperor discovered the ancient remnants of the throne in the deep vaults beneath the Himalayan mountains, it was merely the first step in a far grander design. The battered shell of that ancient machine held incalculable potential. But to fulfill his vision, the Emperor needed more than simply to repair it. He needed to create an entire support system, a hidden citadel capable of housing not just the throne itself, but all the mechanisms, conduits, failsafes, and containment structures required to sustain its operation. Thus began the construction of what would come to be known, to the few permitted to speak of it, as the Imperial Dungeon. The work commenced in absolute secrecy. The world above knew nothing of what transpired beneath its feet. Entire divisions of gene-forged laborers were bred for this single task, men and women designed not for battle, but for endurance, strength, and obedience. They were the Emperor's silent builders, their entire existence devoted to the impossible task set before them. The custodians called them the Nameless. History has never recorded their identities, and their bones lie buried beneath the mountain to this day. At the Emperor's command, immense caverns were hollowed out, far beneath the mountain's roots. Gigantic tunneling engines, relics of the dark age of technology, were unearthed and set to work. These titanic drills, powered by unknown energy sources, carved through stone and metal alike as if they were paper. As the tunnels spread, great vaults were created, enormous hollow chambers with walls reinforced by alloys that defied conventional metallurgy. But even as this physical excavation unfolded, an entirely different kind of labor began: the preparation of the throne's support systems. Vast energy conduits were installed, fed by power sources both ancient and newly devised. These conduits snaked like arteries throughout the complex, feeding into towering pylons and stabilizers that would help anchor the throne's interaction with the webway. Entire sublevels were dedicated to fusion reactors, thermic dampeners, and void-shielded plasma cores, all necessary to maintain the throne's energy demands. Every system was built redundantly, each with multiple fail-safes. If one array failed, another would activate instantly. The Emperor knew that any interruption in power, even for a heartbeat, could bring catastrophic consequences. The very laws of physics were being bent within these walls. There was no room for error. The construction of the throne's chamber was not limited to mechanical engineering. The Emperor understood the metaphysical as well as the material. Psi-active materials were woven into the very stone of the chamber. These strange alloys could absorb, conduct, and stabilize psychic energy. Rune-inscribed pillars lined the walls, etched with stabilizing wards designed to prevent the intrusion of hostile warp entities. These were not the work of superstition, but carefully calculated psychic geometries, precise formulae drawn from the Emperor's unique mastery of the Imperium. In the deepest vaults, secured behind unbreachable doors, the webway gate itself was mounted. This was the heart of the entire project, the portal that would allow humanity to access the webway's hidden corridors. Its surface shimmered like liquid gold, reflecting both light and thought, flickering with faint echoes of dimensions just beyond reach. This portal, unlike any human creation before or since, was an artificial puncture in the skin of reality, stabilized by the throne's immense psychic regulators. Surrounding the throne and its gate were the great adamantium doors, the final bulwark. Towering several dozen meters high, these gates were sealed with interlocking mechanisms that could resist any physical or psychic assault short of the collapse of reality itself. Should a catastrophic breach ever occur, these gates would slam shut, locking the demons of the warp beyond their threshold. As construction continued, the workforce expanded. Thousands became tens of thousands. Entire sects of Mechanicum adepts were quietly relocated to Terra under strict oath and sanction. Unlike their brothers on Mars, these tech priests were forbidden from revealing their work to the greater Mechanicus. They swore blood oaths to the Emperor himself, recognizing no authority but his word. To most within the cult Mechanicus, the throne's construction remained a mystery, hidden even from their highest magi. The priests of Mars labored tirelessly to install the throne's most complex subsystems. Arrays of psychic regulators, temporal dampeners, gravity field manipulators, and dimensional anchors were installed, calibrated to operate not just in physical space, but across the boundary layers of reality itself. Many of these machines operated in ways that defy the current understanding of Imperial science. Entire suborders of the Mechanicus were founded simply to maintain these devices, learning through rote ritual how to preserve systems they did not understand. The Emperor himself oversaw every stage of the work. Even as his armies marched across the stars, he returned often to the Imperial dungeon, guiding the work personally. His presence was not simply supervisory. Many of the systems required his psychic imprint to function at all. With the touch of his hand, complex crystalline matrices would flare to life. With a thought, he would adjust the flow of impossible energies. The laborers below came to see his visits as moments of awe and terror. They would bow in absolute silence as the master of mankind passed through the dimly lit vaults, his golden armor radiant against the shadows. Even the Mechanicum Magi dared not speak unless spoken to. As the chamber neared completion, the Emperor implemented additional layers of security. Psychic wards were embedded into the walls themselves, creating a nullifying lattice that would suppress warp incursion should the webway gate ever destabilize. Custodians were assigned to guard not only the throne but the entire facility, their presence both protective and symbolic. Golden sentinels ensuring that no one but the Emperor himself would control this most sacred of mechanisms. It was during these years of construction that the chamber took on a sacred reverence, even before the ecclesiarchy had ever been conceived. The workers spoke in hushed tones, sensing instinctively that they were not building merely a machine, but the foundation of humanity's future. The scale of the project was staggering. It has been estimated by hidden Imperial records that the construction involved the equivalent industrial capacity of dozens of Forge worlds, sustained over decades. Entire supply chains were rerouted, hidden under the guise of the Emperor's war efforts. Countless tons of materials were smuggled through the bureaucracy of Terra, destined for the vaults no commoner would ever see. In time, the work was completed. The throne stood at the head of the vast chamber, its golden frame gleaming under the artificial lights. Its conduits pulsed with restrained power, its subsystems humming quietly beneath the surface. The webway gate behind it shimmered faintly, tethered between realities, stabilized, for now, by the Emperor's will alone. And above it all, the Imperium marched forward, oblivious to the secret buried beneath its capital. While billions cheered for victories on far-off worlds, the Emperor sat within his hidden fortress, staring into the flickering light of the webway gate, preparing for the day when his great work would be fully activated. In those silent halls beneath Terra, the Golden Throne waited. The Emperor of mankind was many things: conqueror, scientist, ruler, and seer. But perhaps his most dangerous trait was his capacity for foresight. Where others saw triumph and glory during the Great Crusade, he saw cracks forming beneath the surface. He knew that victory on the battlefield would never be enough to secure humanity's future. The warp was watching. The forces of chaos were stirring. Time was short, and so, at the height of humanity's expansion, while his armies marched from one victory to the next, while worlds bent the knee before his legions, the Emperor withdrew. Slowly at first, then almost entirely, he vanished from the front lines. The master of mankind turned his gaze inward, toward Terra, toward the dungeon beneath the Himalayas, and toward the unfinished Golden Throne that would one day decide humanity's fate. To those left behind, this sudden withdrawal was a mystery. Even his most loyal sons among the Primarchs questioned it. Why had their father abandoned the Great Crusade? Why did he leave the burden of command to his sons and the newly formed Council of Terra? These were questions that would one day fester and lead to terrible consequences. But at the time, the Emperor offered no explanations. His reasons remained locked within the vaults of the Imperial dungeon. The truth was simple in its horror. The Webway project demanded his full attention. Its complexity was so vast that even the most brilliant of the Emperor's servants could not complete it without his constant supervision. Every layer of its construction required his psychic guidance, every calibration his hand. The throne was a living construct, and the mind that could control it had to be involved at every stage. And there was something even more urgent: the breach. As the Webway gate took form, the Emperor became aware of disturbances at its edges. The Webway, though isolated from the warp, was not invulnerable. The ancient tunnels, long abandoned by the Eldar, had become unstable. Fluctuations rippled along their paths. Demonic entities, sensing this artificial intrusion, gathered at the frayed edges of the dimensional rift. The very project designed to escape the warp now risked drawing its attention. The Emperor understood that he was playing with reality itself, tampering with laws that even the most advanced civilizations had failed to fully master. The margin for error was non-existent. If he was to succeed, every moment of his will, every ounce of his psychic strength had to be directed into the throne's systems. One miscalculation could allow the horrors of the warp to spill directly into the Palace of Terra, and so the Emperor made his choice. The imperial bureaucracy was reshaped. The Council of Terra was elevated, composed of generals, administrators, and regents who would oversee the affairs of state. Malcador the Sigillite, his most trusted mortal servant, was given authority second only to his own. The Primarchs, his godlike sons, were tasked with prosecuting the crusade in his name. The Adeptus Mechanicus continued its ancient rites of expansion and technological preservation across the stars. To the Imperium at large, nothing appeared to change. The Emperor was simply absent. But inside the Imperial dungeon, far beneath the towering spires of the palace, the true battle for humanity's soul raged in silence. The throne chamber became his second throne room, but one unseen by the masses. The golden seat, now partially operational, served as his command center. Here, the Emperor would sit for days, sometimes weeks, directly interfacing with the throne's systems. His psychic presence filled the vaults, interacting with the living circuitry, constantly recalibrating its shifting parameters as the webway's turbulent pathways threatened to destabilize. The custodians were his only regular companions during these long vigils. Silent, vigilant, they stood as golden statues while the Emperor worked. They bore witness to his moments of frustration and triumph, though they understood little of the cosmic calculations unfolding before them. Outside of these chambers, only a tiny circle of trusted individuals knew the full scope of the Emperor's labor. Malcador, ever present, acted as the Emperor's mouthpiece, conveying orders to the Imperium without revealing the desperate stakes unfolding beneath their feet. The Council of Terra was told only fragments. The Primarchs, his greatest creations, were kept in deliberate ignorance. This was not a decision the Emperor made lightly. To reveal too much would invite interference. Even the most loyal sons might not understand, or worse, might oppose his plan, believing they saw a better path. And in truth, few among them possessed the sheer comprehension to grasp what he was attempting. The Emperor alone carried the full vision, and he alone bore the burden. But his isolation came at a price. The absence of the Emperor from public affairs created a void, one that others rushed to fill. Power shifted from the front lines to the political chambers. Petty rivalries blossomed among administrators. The Primarchs, now left to act as commanders without their father's guiding hand, began to feel not only confusion, but resentment. Some began to whisper in private, questioning why their creator no longer trusted them with the truth. The War Master Horus, once the most beloved of his sons, was elevated in the Emperor's absence. While this decision was made with careful intent, it would in time serve as the seed for ambition, jealousy, and treachery. But that is another tale, for this chapter is not of rebellion, but of isolation. Even as the Imperium expanded outward, bringing new worlds into compliance, the Emperor remained locked in his subterranean war, a war that almost no one even knew was being fought. Days blended into weeks, weeks into months as the Emperor sat upon the throne, his mind split between real space and the labyrinthine corridors of the webway. He charted unstable routes, fortified collapsing junctions, and reinforced wards against the entities pressing at the webway's fraying edges. There were moments when the Emperor would emerge briefly from the dungeon. When he did, his appearance carried with it a strange aura, not of exhaustion, for he was beyond such mortal limitations, but of immense psychic strain. Those who gazed upon him during these brief appearances spoke of an intensity that left them speechless, as though he were carrying the weight of the warp itself within his mind. The Emperor's isolation was not born of weakness or fear. It was an act of supreme will, a calculated sacrifice. To build the webway portal was to reach directly into the untamed forces of creation, to seize control over the very fabric of reality in defiance of the dark gods. And such a task could not be shared. It was his burden alone. And so, while the galaxy thundered with war and conquest, while fleets conquered distant stars, while Primarchs won great victories in his name, the Emperor sat beneath the mountains, alone. Alone with his machine, alone with his vision, alone with the knowledge that all of humanity's future depended not on the battles won in the stars above, but on the unbroken focus of one man seated before an ancient throne of gold. The webway is not empty. That was a truth the Emperor had known from the very first moment he set his will toward mastering it. For all its promises of safety from the warp, for all its ancient alien stability, it remained a realm of hidden dangers. The Eldar, who had once ruled its endless corridors, had long since abandoned large swaths of it. Their fall had turned many pathways into ruins, while others grew unstable or infested with malign entities that hunted in the dark. The Emperor's breach into the webway was not an act of conquest alone, but of trespass. His carefully constructed gate beneath Terra was a wound cut directly into a realm that had not welcomed humanity's touch. Though the throne's arcane regulators and reality anchors held the breach open in stability, even the most precise design could not keep the predators of the Imperium blind to what was occurring. The webway trembled with unnatural vibrations as the Emperor extended his psychic presence through it, claiming junctions that had not seen light since before humanity's birth. And the predators waited. At first, the incursion remained unnoticed by all but the most distant of entities. The sealed construction zone beneath Terra's surface remained secure. The throne's stabilizers held firm. The gate stood as a shimmering barrier, its crystalline surfaces humming with complex frequencies that kept the warp's influence at bay. But beyond the immediate chamber, beyond even the Emperor's initial projections, the disturbance spread like ripples across still water. The corridors of the webway whispered with change. Ancient security systems designed by the Eldar flickered erratically. Long dormant tunnels that had collapsed into stasis for millennia groaned with subtle shifts. In the distance, far beyond the Imperial section, something stirred. The webway, though stable by comparison to the warp, is still linked to the Empyrean. Weak points between the two dimensions act as bleeding wounds in the fabric of space, thin membranes through which demons can glimpse realities not meant for their eyes. The Emperor's new gateway, artificial and incomplete, shone like a beacon to such entities, a fresh tier, a new vulnerability. First came the Watchers, small, formless echoes of the warp's attention, shadows that drifted at the periphery of the Emperor's expanding webway annex. They probed at the psychic barriers like insects testing a sealed chamber. The throne's regulators held, the wards resisted. For a time, the presence of these entities remained manageable, but the warp is never idle. Every presence, every minor touch upon the webway's outer boundaries became an invitation to greater attention. Soon, stronger beings took notice. Demonic entities, emboldened by the Emperor's psychic light spilling through the breach, began to press harder against the seals. The webway had long resisted their incursion, but this new human-made aperture lacked the millennia of refinement the Eldar had built into their structures. And then came the moment that would break the balance forever. It was not sabotage, nor was it the whisperings of traitors, nor even the Emperor's own mistakes that doomed the project. Rather, it was the inevitable collision of opposing forces, the delicate act of balancing the unstable weave of the webway against the endless hunger of the warp. The pressure on the dimensional membranes grew too great. One minor misalignment, one brief pulse of flux in the throne's systems, and a hairline fracture appeared within the gate. A fracture that would widen into a disaster. The rupture was instantaneous. The Golden Throne's stabilizers flared as the gate buckled under the strain. The psychic regulators screamed with alarms. Deep within the throne's core, auto-sanctifiers activated, attempting to contain the breach. The great gates behind the throne shuddered as the tremor echoed through the Imperial dungeon. And then the demons came. They poured through the hairline crack like a flood through a broken dam. Warp fire and screaming Imperium energy burst into the webway expansion beneath Terra. The servants of the ruinous powers flooded the passageways, no longer shadows, but fully manifested horrors. Blasphemous shapes, impossible geometries, creatures of shrieking flame and writhing flesh descended upon the Emperor's builders. The unarmed laborers were the first to fall. Thousands died within moments, bodies shredded, souls devoured, their screams swallowed by the cacophony of invading demons. Tech priests desperately attempted to purge the failing subsystems, chanting Binharic prayers to appease the machine spirits, but the throne systems were no longer theirs to control. Even the arcane protocols woven by the Emperor could not fully contain the raging storm of unreality unleashed within the vaults. The custodians were the first true defense. Golden warriors, faster and stronger than any space marine, deployed in precision. Their guardian spears burned with kinetic force and psychic shielding as they formed defensive lines throughout the expanding webway gate. Alongside them came the Sisters of Silence, their nullifying presence dampening the warp's influence, creating bubbles of stability as they moved through the chaos. Together, they slowed the advance. But they could not stop it. The daemons multiplied with every passing moment, feeding on the ambient psychic energy that bled from the gate's rupture. The webway tunnels became a churning battlefield where reality itself bent under the weight of colliding dimensions. Demonic princes clawed their way into the material realm. Blood letters of Khorne surged forward, their shrieking blades thirsting for mortal flesh. Unclean ones belched waves of corruption across the living rock. Tzeentchian horrors cackled and reshaped the battlefield with every twitch of their ever-shifting forms. The custodians fought with unrelenting fury, each one holding back multitudes. The Sisters of Silence moved with surgical precision, their psychic null fields disrupting the demon's ability to fully materialize. For every inch the enemy advanced, they paid in their own annihilation. Yet still the tide pressed forward. The battle beneath Terra became a silent war, unknown to the Imperium above. While citizens of the Imperium prayed in ignorance and armies conquered new stars, beneath their feet raged the apocalypse they would never see. Only the Emperor and his chosen few knew that the very foundations of the Imperium were crumbling in those dark tunnels. As days bled into weeks, the conflict ground into a brutal stalemate. The throne's stabilizers faltered, but the Emperor refused to allow a full collapse. His mind, now fully engaged in containing the dimensional rupture, sustained the gateway's fragile balance even as his custodians bled to keep the demonic tide at bay. At last the Emperor intervened directly. Extending his will through the Golden Throne's failing systems, he unleashed a psychic inferno that tore across the webway chamber. Demons evaporated into raw energy as his mind cut through them like a god of old. Where the custodians faltered, his power surged forth, buying precious time and pushing back the tide. But this act sealed his fate. The moment the Emperor engaged the throne directly, he bound himself to it. No longer could he step away. The constant strain of holding back the warp's intrusion required every heartbeat of his will. The Golden Throne was no longer a gateway. It had become a prison, and thus the gate was breached. The Webway Project, humanity's greatest hope, was broken. The throne still stood, but its purpose had shifted forever. It was no longer the bridge to mankind's ascension. It had become the Emperor's battlefield, his eternal vigil. There was no moment of triumph, no declaration of victory when the battle for the webway fell silent beneath Terra. The golden throne still stood, its great frame humming under immeasurable strain. Its luminous conduits, once designed to regulate a passage into the webway, now pulsed with a different purpose entirely. The Emperor remained seated upon it, not as master of a new era, but as the lone sentinel preventing catastrophe. This was the beginning of the Great Vigil. The webway breach had been contained, but not sealed. The wound was cauterized, but remained raw. Demons still clawed at the fractured edges of reality just beyond the containment gates, kept at bay only by the Emperor's endless psychic might. The throne, originally constructed as a device of creation, had been forced into an unnatural function, that of a permanent barricade. The dimensional tear behind it could not be closed fully. Its containment now relied on the Emperor himself. In the silence that followed the infernal battle, the true horror of the situation became clear to the select few who stood within the chamber. The custodians, who had fought with unmatched fury in the twisting halls of the Imperial webway, now stood watch as golden statues, their spears lowered but ready. The Sisters of Silence, their psychic null presences, dimming the final whispers of warp influence, withdrew only at the Emperor's command. The Adeptus Mechanicus, their red robes stained with the blood of slaughtered servitors and corrupted data constructs, remained behind to survey the systems that groaned under the weight of the emergency. But it was the Emperor himself who bore the heaviest burden. The psychic regulators of the throne were never intended to run at such sustained intensity. They had been constructed to stabilize controlled dimensional activity, not to serve as the primary barricade against a warp breach of this scale. The machine had adapted under the Emperor's direct will, reconfiguring its functions as he poured his essence into it. New psychic circuits were rerouted through his mind. Where once data crystals and processors carried calculations, now his own consciousness ran those impossible equations in real time. The machine no longer supported him. It had fused with him. The throne was no longer a tool. It had become an extension of the Emperor's body and mind. As the days passed into months and the months into years, the Emperor remained fixed upon the throne, unyielding. His body sat upright, unmoving, while his mind raged in unending battle beyond the limits of human perception. To those who beheld him, he appeared both present and absent, a figure of radiance frozen in place, eyes closed, lips silent, yet his aura stretching out across the very stars. The initial days of the vigil were frantic as the Adeptus Mechanicus scrambled to stabilize the failing systems that surrounded the throne. Burnt-out conduits were replaced, stabilization coils were realigned, the containment gates were reinforced with additional warp-nullifying pylons. No cost was too great, no resource was withheld. The survival of the Imperium now rested entirely on the continued functioning of this singular device and the godlike will of the man bound to it. Above, the Imperium adapted quickly. The Emperor's absence from direct rule had already created a bureaucratic machine capable of functioning without his daily intervention. The High Lords of Terra formalized their roles, while the Adeptus Administratum expanded to govern the sprawling realm of humanity. But none outside the innermost circle truly understood the full extent of what had occurred beneath their feet. To the Imperium at large, the Emperor was simply seated upon his golden throne, radiating strength, guiding his people with divine foresight. The truth was deemed too dangerous for public knowledge, that the throne was failing, that the webway was not secure, and that the Emperor's mind was locked in endless battle to contain a portal that should never have been opened. In these early years of the Great Vigil, the custodians became more than mere protectors. They became the keepers of the throne itself, guardians not only against assassins or traitors, but against any who might interfere with its delicate balance. They learned the rhythms of the throne, could sense the faint pulses of its regulators, and grew attuned to the subtle fluctuations in the Emperor's psychic radiance. The Sisters of Silence, though fewer in number after the war in the Webway, maintained a constant presence. Their psychic nullifying abilities were essential to maintaining stability near the throne. In their presence, the ambient warp resonance was dampened, giving the Emperor fractional relief from the endless tides of pressure beyond the breach. The Mechanicum, too, adapted. A new priesthood formed within the Adeptus Mechanicus, distinct from their Martian brethren. These tech priests specialized exclusively in maintaining the throne's now hyper-specialized subsystems. They developed entire new rituals of maintenance and purification, chants that combined fragments of lost Dark Age knowledge with the machine god's newly canonized dogma. They became known as the custodians of the machine spirit eternal, an order dedicated to preserving the throne's failing components for as long as humanly possible. Yet, even then, the signs of degradation were present. The throne's components had not been designed to run indefinitely under this strain. Some of its crystalline data cores began to fracture. Energy regulators required constant recalibration. The psychic resonance fields fluctuated with increasing frequency. The priests whispered quietly among themselves, uncertain how long the throne could endure this unnatural state. They were not alone in their concern. Among the custodians, grim calculations were made, secret protocols were drafted. If the throne were ever to fail, if the Emperor's will faltered for even a moment, the breach would widen, and Terra itself would be lost to the warp. Plans were made for last stands, for evacuation of key gene stock, for the deployment of final contingencies that would deny chaos its prize. But the Emperor never faltered. Though his physical form withered upon the throne, his mind endured. His psychic beacon, the Astronomicon, began to shine from Terra like a pillar of light across the warp, guiding humanity's fleets across the stars. This signal, powered by the Emperor's own endless battle atop the throne, became humanity's lifeline. Without it, the Imperium would fragment. Entire sectors would vanish into isolation or destruction. And so, as centuries passed, the true nature of the Great Vigil became hidden beneath layers of ritual, myth, and faith. To the common man, the Emperor sat upon the golden throne as a god in repose. They believed he ruled still, that he spoke through his high lords, that his wisdom guided their every action. They did not know that he was locked in eternal psychic struggle to hold back annihilation. They could not comprehend that their prayers were offered to a figure whose mind was engaged in a war beyond comprehension every moment of every day for millennia. Thus, the Golden Throne became the linchpin of the Imperium itself. A machine that was never designed to imprison a god now held the fate of mankind suspended on a knife's edge. The Emperor's great vigil began as an unintended consequence of ambition. But over time, it became the only thing standing between humanity and extinction. Even now, the throne remains. The battle continues. The Emperor endures. The Golden Throne was never meant to be a prison. When the Emperor first bent its ancient systems to his will, when he envisioned a great webway that would shield mankind from the predations of the warp, the throne was intended as a key, a door to humanity's salvation. But that dream had long since died beneath the mountains of Terra. The breach was never truly closed, and the Emperor had bound his own life to the machine, holding back the demonic flood by sheer force of will. Yet the galaxy does not stand still. The Imperium marched forward, century after bloody century. Armies rose and fell. Heroes ascended to legend. Worlds were conquered, lost, and reconquered. But beneath it all, the throne remained, silent, humming, always hungry. At first, the Emperor's will alone had been enough to stabilize the throne's failing systems. His psychic might powered the gate's containment, sustained the Astronomicon's light, and held the breach in check. But even he, for all his incomprehensible power, was not immune to the laws of entropy. 10,000 years have passed since the Emperor was first interred upon his throne, and the machine that sustains him, that he sustains away, began to demand more. The first signs were subtle: a slight fluctuation in the Astronomican's pulse, a faint instability in the psychic barriers around the webway gate. The Mechanicus's tech priests noticed the shifting rhythms and at first dismissed them as minor anomalies, easily corrected through their rites and litanies. Adjustments were made, incantations recited, offerings given to the machine's spirit, but the fluctuations returned, then grew. The tech priests soon discovered what they feared most: that portions of the throne's internal systems were degrading at an accelerating pace. Crystal cores burned out prematurely, stabilizer coils resonated off-frequency, power converters that had functioned flawlessly for millennia now shorted out unpredictably. No amount of sacred oils, no prayers to the Omnissiah, no recalibrations would halt the slow degradation. The machine was aging, not in the way of ordinary devices, but in a far more terrible sense. Its systems, never designed for this unnatural continuous strain, had begun to cannibalize themselves. The solution was discovered only through grim experimentation. The throne could be stabilized, temporarily strengthened, but at a price. It hungered. The Golden Throne required psychic energy to sustain its functions. The Emperor's own will remained vast, but not infinite. The additional strain of containing the webway breach, of projecting the Astronomican, of holding back the constant pressure of the warp, drained even his godlike reserves. To compensate, external sources of psychic power were introduced into the throne systems. At first, they were minor, captured rogue psychers, heretics, condemned astropaths. Their life essence was fed into the throne's hungry conduits, their souls consumed to reinforce the Emperor's burden. The process was horrific, but effective. Stability returned, for a time, but as the millennia passed, the throne's appetite only grew. The amount of psychic sustenance required increased year upon year, decade upon decade. Soon, isolated sacrifices were no longer sufficient. The Mechanicus proposed a permanent system of tithe and consumption. Thus was born the greatest unspoken atrocity of the Imperium, the Psyker Harvest. Across the countless worlds of the Imperium, Psykers are now hunted, captured, and gathered like cattle. The black ships of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica scour the stars, bringing their living cargo to Terra. They are not condemned for their abilities. No, they are venerated for their ultimate sacrifice, their deaths deemed necessary for the Emperor's continued survival. Every day, thousands are fed to the throne. Each soul devoured grants a fleeting renewal to the machine's failing systems. Their life force is converted into raw psychic energy, channeled into the throne's regulators, stabilizing the breach and allowing the Emperor's mind to endure for one more day. The scale of this operation is vast beyond comprehension. The logistics are immense. Entire subsectors exist to maintain the Astra Telepathica's operations. Whole fleets of black ships travel on continuous circuits, never resting, always gathering the Imperium's Psyker tithe. Astropaths, sanctioned psychers, mutants, and even children born with latent abilities, all are offered up as fuel to the Golden Throne. The majority of Imperial citizens do not know the true purpose behind the black ships. To most, they are mysterious vessels serving the God Emperor's will. The ecclesiarchy preaches that those taken are honored, given the chance to serve the Emperor directly. And in a twisted sense, this is true. But few understand what that service truly entails. Agonizing death, disintegration of mind and soul, consumed by a machine that should never have existed in its current form. Within the sanctum of the throne room, the process is conducted with grim efficiency. The sacristans, a specialized order of tech priests, administer the final rites. Psykers are brought one by one before the great machine. They kneel beneath the golden colossus, their minds already unraveling from the pressure of proximity to the Emperor's radiant presence. The sacristans chant prayers as machinery descends, piercing flesh, siphoning soul stuff into the throne's conduits. The Emperor does not speak. He does not intervene. His mind remains locked in its eternal battle, wrestling against the tides of the warp beyond the webway gate. The sacrifices go unnoticed by him, or so it seems. Some whisper that he feels each one, that somewhere behind the vast psychic storm of his consciousness, he mourns the endless procession of lives offered in his name. Others claim that he long ago transcended such mortal concerns, that the cost is meaningless to one who sees the grand design of humanity's survival. And yet, the cycle continues. As centuries grind on, the throne's dependency grows ever more severe. Where once a few hundred psykers sufficed, now tens of thousands are consumed every year. The black ships strain to keep up with demand. Entire worlds have been left depopulated of psyker gene stock. The psyker population of the Imperium itself has become a strategic resource, not for training, not for war, but as fuel. And still, the Golden Throne hungers. The Adeptus Mechanicus has grown desperate, their deepest mag search for lost technologies that might reinforce the throne's decaying systems. Ancient STCs are sought. Forbidden Xenos sciences are studied in secret. Radicals whisper of unsanctioned experiments that might extend the throne's life, or damn them all. But the true horror remains this: there is no long-term solution. The Golden Throne was never designed for this function. It endures only through sacrifice, only through the constant flow of psychic life force that sustains the Emperor's battle against the warp breach. Without those sacrifices, the throne would fail, the breach would widen, Terra itself would be lost, and with it, humanity would fall. Thus, the hunger remains eternal. The throne devours, the Imperium feeds, and the Emperor endures. For now, in the vast sanctum where the Golden Throne rests, there is no sound. The humming of ancient engines fades into the background, a soft vibration within the stone. The flickering light of plasma conduits dances across towering pillars of adamantium and wraithbone. But no voices echo here. No prayers are spoken aloud. No chants rise to the Emperor's ears. This is not a place for words. Only the custodians remain. They have stood here for 10,000 years, longer than any one life could endure, longer than most civilizations last. They are the Emperor's bodyguard, his most trusted, his firstborn defenders. While the rest of the galaxy has burned, while empires have risen and fallen, while even the Space Marines have waxed and waned in their legions, the custodians have never faltered. They were not created for war alone, though few living beings can match them in battle. They were designed to be perfect. Unlike the mass-produced Astartes, whose gene lines are cloned, adapted, and modified, each custodian is crafted individually by the Emperor's original gene-forging process. Each one is unique, a masterpiece of biological perfection, intellect, and psychic resistance. Each custodian is a living symbol of the Emperor's will, unwavering, incorruptible, absolute. Their charge is not to command armies. Their duty is far more intimate, far more dreadful. They stand watch over the throne. Every hour of every day for 10,000 years, custodians have guarded the Golden Throne itself, standing in absolute silence before the vast machine that imprisons their master. To the Imperium, the throne room is legend. To the custodians, it is sacred ground, a battlefield not of blood, but of presence. For here, in this place, even the slightest error, the smallest lapse in vigilance, could allow horror to take root. For though the breach into the webway has been stabilized, it has never been fully sealed. The entities of the warp still press against its boundaries, searching for weakness. The throne groans under their weight. The psychic storm behind the gate is a constant pressure felt even by those without psychic gifts. The custodians are attuned to it. They feel every fluctuation in the ambient field surrounding the Emperor's body. They sense when the energies surge, when the psychic regulators strain under unseen pressure. Even the faintest ripple can herald disaster. And so their watch is not passive. They are guardians of the throne's balance, always ready to act at the first sign of instability. No outsider enters the throne room without passing under the eyes of the custodians. Even the High Lords of Terra approach this place only with rare permission and always under the careful observation of the Golden Warriors. Their presence is a reminder to all. No one approaches the Emperor unbidden. No one. Within their order, secret protocols exist, contingencies known only to them and to their master. If the throne should begin to fail catastrophically, if the containment breach surges, if demons force their way through the fractured webway, the custodians are prepared. In such an event, there would be no hesitation. Sacred rites have been rehearsed, drilled endlessly for millennia. Entire defensive contingents exist beneath the surface of the palace, prepared to seal the chamber, to contain or destroy whatever monstrosity emerges, even at the cost of their own lives. This is not mere ceremony, for though the custodians are mighty beyond any mortal soldier, they know the scale of the threat they guard against. If even a single greater demon were to breach the Emperor's sanctuary, the consequences would be unimaginable. They stand not simply as bodyguards, but as the final line of reality itself. Their devotion is absolute. Many outside the custodians view them as silent statues, figures of gold, who simply watch and wait. But this perception belies the depth of their service. They are the Emperor's last companions. In the earliest centuries of the Vigil, when his mind was still more present, the Emperor would occasionally speak, if not with words, then through bursts of psychic communion. There were rare moments when custodians were granted fleeting glimpses of his continuing consciousness, flashes of thought, fragments of will. Orders were sometimes conveyed not for the Imperium, but for the maintenance of the throne itself. These moments were never spoken of outside their ranks. Over time, as the strain of sustaining the Astronomicon and containing the breach consumed ever more of his being, even these brief touches grew fewer. Today there are years, even centuries, when the custodians sense nothing at all, but they do not lose faith. Whether the Emperor's mind is active or deeply submerged in psychic struggle, they remain at his side. They are not merely guardians of his body. They are guardians of his dignity. The passage of millennia has withered his physical form. What remains upon the throne is not the man who once walked among them. Yet the custodians permit no eye to gaze too long upon his physical state. They stand as shields, not only against threats, but against profane curiosity. They preserve the sanctity of his image, for the Emperor remains perfect in their eyes, whether his flesh endures or not. Their silence is not empty. It is reverence. It is loyalty beyond comprehension. Among themselves, the custodians train endlessly, not in the arts of external warfare, though they remain unrivaled in battle, but in understanding the increasingly unstable machine that sustains their lord. They study its rhythms. They memorize every fluctuation in its energy patterns. They learn the breathing pulse of its ancient, failing mechanisms. For the Golden Throne is no longer merely a machine. It is a living battlefield. Every moment that passes within the throne room is another moment in the war between the Emperor and the Warp. And the custodians stand at his side in that unseen conflict, ready to act should the tide ever shift. Though rarely spoken of, the custodians are also keepers of the most terrible secrets. They alone know of the fail-safes buried within the throne, such as the Talisman of 7 Hammers, the final dead man switch installed by Vulcan himself. They know what must be done should the Emperor fall. They pray daily that they will never be called upon to activate such measures. Outside the sanctum, the Imperium worships the Emperor as a god. Inside, the custodians serve him as they always have, as the Lord of mankind, their master, their creator, their father. They do not kneel, they do not chant, they do not pray, they serve. And so, for 10,000 years, the silent vigil continues. The custodians watch, the throne endures, the Emperor remains, and the war within the shadows of reality wages on, unseen by all but them. The Adeptus Mechanicus calls all machines holy, but none are as sacred as the Golden Throne. It is the most complex, most ancient, and most dangerous machine still functioning in the Imperium. The Mechanicum has maintained it for 10,000 years, yet even now, they do not truly understand it. In their minds, it is not merely a device, it is a god machine, a fragment of the Omnissiah's infinite mystery, dwelling in the very heart of humanity's dominion. The throne's secrets are not shared among the wider Mechanicus of Mars. Its full design, function, and condition are hidden from all but a tiny enclave of tech priests who reside permanently beneath the Imperial Palace. They are the cult of the throne, a priesthood within the priesthood, whose entire existence is devoted to the sustenance and survival of the machine that sustains the Emperor. Their numbers are few, their knowledge incomplete, but their duty is absolute. Unlike the tech priests who maintain starships and titanic engines across the Imperium, the cult of the throne does not worship the machine's spirit through grand litanies or common rituals. Their rites are older, more obscure, passed down through cryptic fragments of data recovered from the earliest days of the Great Crusade. Each new High Magos of the throne inherits not merely authority, but the accumulated notes, theoretical conjectures, and half-deciphered schematics of countless predecessors, a growing labyrinth of knowledge that none have fully mastered. Within the vaults surrounding the throne chamber, entire libraries of forbidden data are kept under lock, accessible only to those few who hold the highest clearance. Binary texts from the dark age of technology, fragmentary standard template constructs, mysterious algorithms written in pre-imperial machine code, even alien knowledge harvested from defeated Xenos empires has been secretly incorporated into their records in desperate attempts to repair or replicate systems they cannot reproduce. For the throne itself is dying. The systems that regulate the psychic flow from the Emperor's body to the Astronomicon are eroding, one layer at a time. Energy conduits burn out faster than they can be replaced. Stabilizer coils rupture unexpectedly. The machine's primary core, the crystalline psychoreactive lattice that amplifies the Emperor's will, is developing fractures that no current technology can repair. The High Magi whisper among themselves that every day they are less able to control the throne and more dependent on the Emperor's own will to stabilize its decaying structure. The Emperor does not communicate directly, yet his living presence continues to interface with the machine's core systems, performing calculations beyond the Mechanicus understanding. Without his mind regulating the throne, it would have collapsed long ago. In truth, the cult of the throne has not been repairing the machine for thousands of years. They are managing a slow descent into entropy, desperately patching failing components with jury-rigged solutions, praying that each fix will hold for another year, another decade, another century. Entire chambers within the dungeon beneath Terra have been converted into forges and laboratories devoted solely to creating replacement parts for the throne's countless subsystems. But many of these parts are no longer made according to the original designs. because the original designs are lost. Instead, generations of magi have created approximations, substituting crude analogs for ancient components that no longer exist. Even these imperfect replacements are becoming more difficult to produce. Some materials used in the original construction, rare psychoreactive crystals, hyperconductive alloys, gravity-stabilizing plasma fields, cannot be synthesized or mined anymore. Entire forge worlds have been scoured for substitute resources, to little avail. And with each generation, the technomagisters admit quietly that their understanding slips further from the truth. The cult of the throne has become as much a priesthood of fear as of knowledge. They fear the day when even their best improvisations will no longer suffice, when the last replacement coil burns out, when the last functional lattice cracks, when no amount of psychic sacrifice can keep the ancient regulators stable, and so they search. Across the galaxy, secret Mechanicus expeditions scour forgotten worlds, forbidden Xenos ruins, and ancient vaults for lost technologies that might extend the throne's life. Entire generations of explorator fleets have disappeared into unknown regions of space, seeking out any fragment of knowledge that might stave off the inevitable. Some of these missions have returned with discoveries, fragments of lost STC templates, partial schematics of similar ancient machines, even alien devices that mirror certain functions of the throne's architecture. These fragments are brought in secret to Terra, where they are studied under the strictest of secrecy by the cult's innermost circles. Not all who study these artifacts survive. Several high magi have been lost to cognitive collapse or mysterious failures while attempting to integrate forbidden data into the throne's systems. It is believed by some that certain knowledge is simply too dangerous, too contradictory with human understanding, to be safely incorporated. The machine spirit of the throne resists alteration, and in its resistance, it has driven many of its caretakers to madness. The custodians, ever vigilant, monitor these magi closely. They permit their work, for it is necessary, but they trust them not at all. Should any tech priest tamper too recklessly or appear compromised by Xenos heresy or warp influence, the Golden Warriors intervene without hesitation. Many tech priests have quietly vanished from the cult of the throne's ranks in such purges, their disappearances never spoken of, their failures erased from the official records. Yet, despite the danger, the research continues. Some among the cult whisper that the key to restoring the throne may not lie in repairing it, but in replacing it entirely. To create a new golden throne, fully functional, purged of its defects, based on principles rediscovered from humanity's lost technological mastery. But such an endeavor would require knowledge that likely no longer exists within the Imperium's boundaries. Others speak of heretical alternatives, contacting Xenos races with forbidden expertise, or even bargaining with entities of the warp itself for knowledge. These are blasphemies punishable by death, and yet, when the fate of the throne hangs in the balance, such whispers continue in the darkest corners of the dungeon. The High Lords of Terra, for their part, are rarely informed of the true state of the throne. The cult of the throne reports stability, control, and success. The High Magi present graphs of power stability, of psychic flux regulation, of containment integrity, all carefully managed to present an image of competence. But the truth known only to the cult's innermost circle is far more grim. The throne is failing, slowly, relentlessly. It is a monument to both the Emperor's unmatched genius and mankind's slow collapse into ignorance. A god machine sustained not by mastery, but by faith, desperation, and sacrifice. Every passing year brings them closer to the brink, and in the shadowed halls beneath Terra, the cult of the throne continues its desperate work, praying to the Omnitia for a salvation that may never come. The Golden Throne hungers, And to feed it, the Imperium has become a vast, merciless engine, harvesting souls on a scale beyond imagining. Across the millions of worlds under Imperial rule, there exists a quiet, ever-present dread. For the Psyker-born, it is not merely fear of the warp, or of the Inquisition, or of mutation. It is fear of the black ships. These obsidian leviathans, cold and silent, glide through the void like great predators, known and yet never fully understood by the masses. They come without warning. They arrive in the skies above hive cities and fortress worlds alike. And when they appear, all who bear the Psyker's gift know that their time has come. The black ships belong to the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, but their true master is the Golden Throne itself. Their sole purpose is the collection of Psykers, not for training, not for service, but for sacrifice. For the throne's hunger grows each year, and it can only be sated with living minds saturated in the energies of the warp. The operation is vast beyond comprehension. Every sector maintains a quota. Every planetary governor understands their responsibility. Psykers are to be rounded up, identified, and handed over to the Imperial authorities with no delay or resistance. Failure to comply is heresy of the highest order. Resistance is met with the sword, the lasgun, or the exterminatus. Most Imperial citizens know little of what happens after the black ships depart. The ecclesiarchy teaches that the Psykers serve the Emperor in his palace, elevated to great purpose, joining the Emperor's holy choir. They are told that those taken are blessed to give their souls in service of the Master of Mankind. The truth is far more terrible. The black ships are floating prisons. Their holds are filled with thousands, sometimes tens of thousands, of Psykers at a time. Each one is bound, drugged, and contained within null fields that suppress their abilities. The psychic pressure aboard these vessels is suffocating, even for the highly trained Sisters of Silence who staff them. It is a voyage of months or years through the warp, as the ships converge toward Terra, each one carrying its grim cargo toward inevitable oblivion. Inside the ships, the Psykers are sorted and categorized. A tiny fraction of them, perhaps 1 in 1,000, will be strong enough, stable enough, and pure enough to serve the Imperium directly as sanctioned Psykers. They will become astropaths, sanctioned battle Psykers, or sanctioned telepaths for Imperial organizations. These individuals are subjected to rigorous testing, soul-binding rituals, and indoctrination. Their service is harsh, dangerous, and often brief, but it spares them from a darker fate. The remaining Psykers, the vast majority, are marked for sacrifice. They are transferred to Terra in endless processions, herded from the docks of the black ships to the dark chambers beneath the Imperial Palace. There, the sacristans and the priesthood of the throne await them. These sacristans, a specialized branch of the Adeptus Mechanicus, distinct from the broader cult of the throne, administer the rites of sacrifice with terrifying precision. They are neither cruel nor kind. Emotion has no place in their service. To them, the Psykers are fuel, vital, precious, but ultimately expendable fuel for the survival of humanity itself. The process is mechanized and merciless. Each Psyker is strapped to an articulated throne, guided along vast, winding corridors that descend into the inner sanctum of the Imperial dungeon. The closer they draw to the Golden Throne, the more the air hums with unnatural power. The pressure of the Emperor's psychic radiance crushes weaker minds even before the final chamber is reached. Many are broken before they arrive. Some babble incoherently. Others fall silent, their minds shattered by proximity to the throne's overwhelming presence. One by one, they are presented before the Golden Throne itself, though they rarely see it directly. Blinding lights and mechanized hoods prevent the condemned from fully beholding the Emperor's ruinous body, both to protect them from madness and to preserve the sanctity of the site. Then the extraction begins. Specialized mechanisms descend from the golden machinery above. Needles, siphons, psychic siphoning arrays, and soul-draining tubes. With surgical precision, the sacristans initiate the ritual. The Psyker's life force, their soul, their connection to the warp, is drawn from them, transferred through conduits that feed directly into the throne's failing regulators. The process is not instantaneous. The most powerful Psykers may take hours to fully consume. Their life energy is slowly bled away, converted into raw psychic sustenance that replenishes the Emperor's waning reserves, stabilizes the Astronomican's flickering beam, and strengthens the containment fields that hold the warp breach sealed. Most are gone within minutes. Some scream, some go silently. A few weep with joy, believing the propaganda that this is their ultimate service to the Emperor. The sacristans neither listen nor care. Once drained, the husk of flesh that remains is incinerated immediately. The next in line is brought forward, and so it repeats. Every day, without pause, thousands per day, tens of thousands per year, millions across centuries. Entire generations of Psykers have been consumed by the throne since the end of the heresy. Their deaths, hidden from the eyes of the Imperium, are the true fuel that sustains mankind's continued survival. The scale of this operation has forced the Astra Telepathica to expand relentlessly. Specialized genetic programs quietly monitor human populations to identify Psyker mutations earlier and more efficiently. Breeding programs have been authorized on certain worlds to ensure a stable supply of Psyker stock. The more the throne demands, the more ruthless the harvesting becomes. There are whispers, even among the high ranks of the Astra Telepathica, that the Imperium is approaching a crisis point, that the number of Psykers required to sustain the throne may one day exceed the natural birth rate of Psyker mutants across the Imperium. When that day comes, there will be no one left to harvest, and the throne will starve. But such matters are rarely spoken aloud. To do so would be to invite the Inquisition's attention. In the eyes of the ecclesiarchy, the system is perfect. In sermons broadcast across the stars, they declare that the Emperor is eternally sustained by the willing sacrifice of his chosen. Billions of citizens believe these half-truths and rejoice when their kin are taken by the black ships. It is seen as an honor, a blessing. In truth, it is a sacrifice demanded by necessity. The Golden Throne has become a carnivorous god, feeding on the Psyker-born to preserve the light of mankind. Even the custodians who stand silent beside the throne do not speak of the cost. They witness the endless procession of souls offered to the machine that imprisons their master, and they say nothing. It is not their place to question. Their duty is to ensure that no threat disrupts the feeding, that the Emperor's vigil continues, and so the cycle continues, unbroken, decade after decade. The black ships arrive, the Psykers are harvested, the sacristans perform their work, the Golden Throne consumes, and the Emperor endures. The Golden Throne sustains the Emperor. The Psyker tithe sustains the throne. But there are those who know that neither can endure forever. Far beneath the shining cathedrals and towering spires of Terra, far even below the Imperial dungeon where the throne itself hums in ancient agony, there are other chambers, vaults without names, archives without records, locked behind layered security seals, guarded by both custodian and inquisitorial authority. These are the sanctums where the darkest truths of the Imperium are stored. Here, a different war is being fought. A war not of bolters or blades, but of knowledge, forbidden, dangerous, and utterly necessary. The Inquisition knows the truth, or rather, fragments of it. The most senior members of the Ordo Malleus, the Ordo Hereticus, and the Ordo Xenos are granted limited access to reports from the Cult of the Throne and the Astra Telepathica. They know of the throne's decay. They know that the Psyker harvest grows larger each decade. They know that one day the Emperor's containment of the webway breach may falter, and they know that when that day comes, there may be nothing left to stop the warp from consuming Holy Terra. The official position of the High Lords is simple. The Golden Throne endures. The Astronomicon burns bright. The Emperor protects. But within the Inquisition's inner circles, beneath layers of secrecy piled atop secrecy, there is no such comfort. There is only desperation. Some Inquisitors believe that a solution may still be found. These are the researchers, the archivists, the seekers of lost knowledge. They trawl ancient data vaults, scouring fragments of pre-imperial history, hoping to recover the lost sciences that first gave rise to the throne. They bribe, threaten, and even kill to gain access to the Mechanicus's deepest vaults on Mars, knowing full well that the cult of the throne hoards its own secrets. In secret conclaves, radical factions within the Inquisition debate dangerous strategies. The Thorians argue for the possibility of the Emperor's reincarnation, believing that the throne's failure may not spell doom, but transformation. The Xanthites seek forbidden ways to bend the warp itself to their will, gambling that humanity might finally master the realm that has enslaved it for so long. The Polypsychana whisper of unknown pathways to redirect the Emperor's soul should his body fail. Most of these discussions would be considered heresy if uttered in public. But within the soundproof chambers of inquisitorial fortresses, they are matters of grim necessity. Other Inquisitors pursue far darker options. There are rumors, spoken only behind sealed doors, of Inquisitors who have trafficked with the Eldar for lost knowledge of the Webway's architecture, of those who have hunted the scattered remnants of pre-imperial human civilizations where fragments of standard template constructs might still exist, of those who have dared to experiment upon captured Xenos technologies, seeking breakthroughs that would horrify the ecclesiarchy. There are even whispers of Inquisitors who have captured demons themselves, or consorted with unspeakable entities in the warp, seeking knowledge of the throne's failing systems directly from those who would see it fall. These are the most dangerous of all, for every experiment carries a cost. The webway breach beneath the throne is like a wound held closed by the Emperor's will. To tamper with its structure, even slightly, risks destabilizing the entire balance. The Inquisition knows this. The custodians know this, and still desperate minds push forward, gambling that the greater risk is inaction. The most radical experiments are not performed on Terra itself. Secret research stations hidden across the galaxy have been established for these purposes, concealed even from many within the Inquisition itself. Deep space laboratories orbit black holes, where failed experiments can be jettisoned into eternal gravity wells. Isolated moons house forbidden research into psychoreactive alloys and alternate forms of warp-dampening fields. Entire facilities have been lost. Entire research teams have vanished, consumed by their own experiments or silenced by inquisitorial kill teams when their work became too dangerous. The price of failure in this shadow war is annihilation. The price of success, however, is uncertain, for even among the radical factions, none can say with confidence what will happen if the throne is tampered with too aggressively. Some believe the Emperor's psychic presence is so intertwined with the machine that any major alteration may sever his mind entirely. Others argue that the throne itself is evolving, growing dependent on the Emperor's will, and that attempting to correct its function may destroy the fragile balance he maintains. And then there is the most terrifying possibility of all, that the Emperor himself may resist any attempt to alter his prison. For 10,000 years, he has fought an unending war against the warp breach beneath his throne. His mind has become not only the Imperium's beacon, but its last bulwark. To interfere with his work, even with good intentions, may be seen as a threat. Some Inquisitors fear that the Emperor may perceive such interference as sabotage and lash out with the full fury of his psychic might, obliterating those who would dare to save him. Thus, the paradox deepens. The Inquisition seeks to save the Emperor, but to do so may kill him. And yet, to do nothing is to watch the throne decay year by year, inching closer to final collapse. Among the custodians, these debates are monitored with great caution. They permit the Inquisition's research to continue, for now, but they stand ready to intervene at any moment. Several radical Inquisitors have already disappeared without trace, erased by custodian blades in the dead of night. The custodians do not act out of cruelty, but necessity. Their duty is to protect the Emperor first, humanity second, and all others not at all. If that means silencing even the Inquisition, they will not hesitate. In the end, this is the terrible secret at the heart of Terra. The Emperor lives, and yet is dying. The throne functions, and yet is failing. The Imperium endures, and yet is crumbling. And all the knowledge that might save him is forbidden. The war for the Golden Throne is not fought with armies, but with knowledge. It is a war of secrets, of desperate gambits, of unthinkable risks. It is a war that few even know exists, and fewer still are allowed to survive. And so the Inquisition continues its forbidden research, racing against the slow death of the throne itself. While above them, across the stars, 1 billion souls pray. And beneath it all, the Emperor endures, for now. Across the grim darkness of the Imperium, few dare to speak of it aloud. Fewer still even know the words. But in the secretive libraries of forbidden knowledge, in the vaulted chambers of heretical cults, and in the most hidden records of certain inquisitorial factions, there exists a name whispered only in shadow: the Star Child. To most of the Imperium, such a phrase would be meaningless, or worse, blasphemous. The Emperor sits upon the Golden Throne. He endures. He is the God Emperor of mankind, eternal, divine, unchanging. That is the truth every citizen of the Imperium is taught from birth, the unassailable doctrine enforced by the ecclesiarchy and guarded by the Inquisition. But beneath that official truth, far beyond the reach of most mortal eyes, an older and more dangerous theory festers, one that could redefine the very nature of the Emperor, the Golden Throne, and humanity's ultimate fate. The Star Child hypothesis is not a simple heresy. It is a desperate hope wrapped in terrifying uncertainty. Its central claim is this: that the Emperor's physical body, bound eternally to the failing Golden Throne, is not the sum total of his being. That his soul, fragmented and yet enduring, waits for the moment when his mortal frame finally fails, so that it might be fully released into the warp. And in that release, the Emperor would be reborn. According to the adherents of the Star Child belief, the Emperor's psychic essence, immeasurably powerful, purified through 10,000 years of sacrifice, is destined to ascend beyond its current state. No longer trapped within the decaying carcass that sits upon the throne, his spirit would rise into the immaterium itself, taking its place as a true warp god, not like the ruinous powers that hunger and corrupt, but as a guiding light for all of mankind, a god of order, a god of stability, a god of humanity alone. In this belief lies a form of salvation more profound than anything offered by the Imperium's current dogma. No longer would humanity need to cower behind the Astronomicon, forever sacrificing psychers to keep the beacon alight. No longer would the Golden Throne need constant, failing repairs or blood sacrifices to sustain it. Instead, the Emperor would become humanity's eternal guardian in the warp itself, directly opposing the Chaos Gods on their own plane of existence. His light would shine across the immaterium. The warp itself would be tamed, Humanity would at last rise above its tormentors, not through technology or endless sacrifice, but through divine ascension. It is a seductive vision, and a dangerous one, for the implications of the Star Child theory are terrifying to those who cling to the current order. If the throne must fail for the Emperor to ascend, then the daily sacrifices, the Psyker tithe, the repairs, the black ships, are not acts of preservation, but acts of postponement. If true, then every day the throne continues to function delays the Emperor's true transformation. The very system sustaining the Imperium is, paradoxically, holding back its final salvation. This idea is absolute heresy to the ecclesiarchy, who maintain that the Emperor is already ascended, that he is both alive and God, fully divine while seated on the throne. To suggest otherwise is to deny the foundation of the Imperial Creed. Thus, those who study the Star Child do so in utter secrecy. Among the Inquisition, the theory finds support primarily within the Thorian faction, radicals who believe that the Emperor's soul may one day reincarnate into a new vessel, perhaps even into a new human host, prepared to receive his essence. They scour the galaxy for potential candidates, monitoring the birth of extraordinarily potent psychers, wondering if one may carry the seed of the Star Child's return. Some whisper that such individuals have already been born, rare psychers of godlike potential, their destinies intertwined with the Emperor's fading breath. Whether these claims are true or madness is known only to the Thorian conclaves that hide their findings from even their inquisitorial peers. There are even darker rumors that secret experiments have been conducted, forbidden rituals, genetic manipulations, and soul-binding ceremonies, all in an effort to create a suitable vessel for the Emperor's rebirth. If these efforts were ever uncovered, even the most radical inquisitor would risk annihilation at the hands of the custodians or excommunicate traitorous. For not all agree that the Star Child's emergence would be salvation. The ecclesiarchy views such talk as heresy not merely because it challenges their authority, but because it threatens the very stability of the Imperium. What would happen if word spread that the Golden Throne need not endure? That the Psyker sacrifices were unnecessary, that the God Emperor might not require their worship to be reborn? Entire hive worlds would descend into rebellion. Pilgrims would question their faith. The ruling structures of the Imperium would fracture beneath the weight of uncertainty. The machinery of the state depends on the unshakable truth that the Emperor sits upon his throne, as he has always done, and always will. And yet the whispers persist. In hidden sanctuaries, secret Star Child cults gather. They offer no prayers to the Emperor as he sits now. Instead, they pray for his death, believing it to be his release. To these fringe sects, every day the throne remains active is a prolonging of suffering, both for the Emperor and for humanity itself. There are even those who speak of prophecy, ancient, half-deciphered records from the dark age of technology and the lost age of the Unification Wars. Prophecies that speak of a second sun rising in the warp, a psychic star that would burn away the corruption of the Chaos Gods and establish a new, incorruptible order. Some Thorians believe that this prophecy describes the Star Child's emergence. Others believe it is simply another manipulation of the warp, a deception seeded by the Changer of Ways to lure mankind into destroying its only protection. For that is the ultimate risk. Even if the Star Child theory is true, there are no guarantees. The warp is treacherous. If the Emperor's soul were to fully enter it, would it rise as hoped? Or would it be devoured by the Chaos Gods, its purity corrupted, its essence twisted into a new horror? Would mankind be elevated or doomed forever? And so the secret war continues. The ecclesiarchy suppresses the Star Child doctrine with ruthless efficiency. The Inquisition debates it in whispers. The custodians monitor all with silent vigilance, prepared to strike down any who threaten the Emperor's current state. For now, the Golden Throne remains. The Emperor endures. The Star Child sleeps or waits, or perhaps does not exist at all. And the fate of mankind hangs upon a mystery that no one dares resolve. The Golden Throne was never built to last. That was not its original sin. Its designers, whether from the lost dark age of technology or the Emperor himself, could not have anticipated the task to which it would be subjected. It was never intended to serve as a life support sarcophagus for a dying god, nor as the last bastion against the eternal howling of the warp. It was not designed to imprison the soul of the Emperor for 10,000 years. And yet, for 10 millennia, it has done exactly that. But now the machine withers. Deep beneath the surface of Terra, the once pristine mechanisms of the throne grind under a weight they were never meant to bear. The ancient psycho-reactive crystalline cores that once gleamed with controlled light now flicker irregularly. Their surfaces are cracked like glass left to weather the storms of unending time. Their fractures are not merely cosmetic. Each new fault line weakens the integrity of the system as a whole. The coils that channel the Emperor's psychic energy through the throne's framework vibrate out of alignment more frequently. Once, such minor shifts would occur perhaps once in a century. Now they are a near-daily occurrence. Every deviation requires urgent recalibration by the sacristans and tech priests of the cult of the throne. The repairs have become increasingly desperate, patchwork at best, ritualistic at worst. The great plasma regulators, once capable of flawlessly moderating the flow of immense energy into the throne's primary node, now suffer micro-fluctuations that risk catastrophic overloads. The tech priests chant continuously, performing emergency rites while servitor teams manually override safety systems designed to operate autonomously. What once ran as a seamless orchestration of ancient technology now operates like a wounded beast kept alive by frantic surgery. Even the machine spirit of the throne itself shows signs of degradation. The entity that once maintained the throne's more subtle operations, regulating balance, adjusting the psychic harmonics, correcting dimensional stresses, is no longer fully cooperative. Fragments of its logic are failing, its code unraveling under the strain of continuous misuse. Its ancient algorithms, once self-correcting, now freeze in cascading logic loops that require intervention by the highest-ranking magi. There are whispers, even among the most devoted sacristans, that the machine spirit is becoming resentful, not in a conscious sense, but as a complex artificial intelligence. Its confusion has become a danger in itself. The containment fields holding back the breach into the webway have also grown unstable. The dimensional anchors that pin reality in place at the breach point fluctuate with increasing irregularity. Even minor shifts in their frequency cause warp pressure to spike dangerously. The custodians monitor these fluctuations with grim intensity, knowing that any spike, if left unchecked, could widen the breach once again. Worse still, the strain of 10,000 years has created phenomena never anticipated by even the Emperor's foresight. Localized tears in reality have begun to form within the sealed chambers that surround the throne. Micro rifts, tiny fractures in the membrane between real space and the warp, flicker into existence for fractions of a second before being suppressed by emergency field activations. The sacristans call these warp breaths, and they fear their increasing frequency. Each one represents a potential point of failure where demonic entities might once again breach into the Imperial dungeon. The psychic toll on the Emperor is immeasurable. Though his mind remains locked in its unending struggle, the burdens placed upon him grow heavier with each passing year. As the throne's physical systems fail, more and more of the stabilization must be done directly. The Astronomicon, the beacon that guides Imperial starships through the warp, flickers more frequently than ever before. Entire sectors experience momentary disruptions, leaving navigators blind and vulnerable to the warp's predations. Some areas of the galaxy have seen the Astronomicon dim so much that they are effectively cut off for weeks or months at a time. Travel becomes increasingly dangerous, and commerce grinds to a halt as warp routes become impassable. The ripple effect is catastrophic. Entire systems are isolated. Reinforcements cannot reach embattled worlds. Vital supplies fail to arrive. War zones are lost not through defeat, but through disconnection. Hive worlds experience famine and revolt when their supply lines vanish into the void. The Imperium's fragile balance of power teeters closer to collapse with each disruption, and yet the High Lords of Terra continue to declare stability. The Ecclesiarchy preaches the same sermons it has for millennia. The Emperor endures. The Golden Throne is strong. The sacrifices are accepted. The Astronomicon burns by his eternal will. But behind closed doors, those who are tasked with overseeing the throne know the truth. The throne's structural decline has accelerated. Components fail faster than they can be replaced. The cult of the throne has exhausted most known sources of original replacement parts. Even the secret stockpiles built up during the early centuries of the Vigil have been depleted. The sacristans now rely increasingly on fabricated substitutes, less stable, less durable, prone to breakdowns. Entire subsystems have been cannibalized to keep others functioning. The throne is being disassembled even as it operates, its less critical systems sacrificed to preserve its core functions. This desperate scavenging buys time, years, perhaps decades, but at the cost of systemic fragility. The more they strip away, the fewer safety nets remain, and they know the most horrifying truth of all: no one can build another. The knowledge to construct a new golden throne, to replicate the psychic circuitry, the dimensional regulators, the ancient zero-point energy matrices, has long since been lost. Even the best efforts of the Mechanicus and the Inquisition's forbidden archives have produced only fragmentary understanding. No Forge world, no Magos Dominus, no explorator fleet can rebuild what the Emperor once forged. The Golden Throne is unique, and it is dying. The custodians, ever vigilant, have already prepared for the worst. Within the hidden protocols of the throne room exists the talisman of 7 hammers, the final contingency. Should the throne fail entirely and the warp breach tear open unchecked, this failsafe will obliterate the entire complex in an instant, vaporizing both the Emperor's body and the surrounding palace district. It is not an act of mercy, but of necessity, to deny the warp any opportunity to possess the Emperor's remains. It is a grim calculation, one the custodians review regularly. For now, the throne endures, but only barely. The Golden Throne is not a monument to eternal stability. It is a failing machine, groaning under the weight of 10,000 years. Each new day it survives is a miracle. And one day soon, the miracle will end. For 10,000 years, the Golden Throne has been failing. Not quickly, not dramatically, but relentlessly, like a glacier cracking under invisible pressure. Its ancient systems continue to function only by the grace of the Emperor's indomitable will and the frantic interventions of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Yet every High Magos, every sacristan who works beneath the Imperial dungeon, knows the unspoken truth. They are losing the fight. And so, in the shadows behind the public rituals, the official litanies, and the endless chanting of the machine god, a series of desperate and dangerous repair attempts have been made, each one riskier than the last, each one a secret locked beneath the surface of Terra. It is not only the cult of the throne that has sought solutions. The crisis facing the Golden Throne transcends dogma. Radical tech priests, inquisitors, rogue scholars, and desperate visionaries have all pursued their own forbidden paths in the hope of halting, reversing, or bypassing the throne's decay. Some of these efforts have been sanctioned, quietly, unofficially, by the High Lords of Terra, who recognize that no doctrine will matter if the Emperor falls. Others have been conducted in secret, far from official eyes, by those willing to risk excommunication or annihilation for even the faintest hope of salvation. In the deepest catacombs beneath the palace, entire laboratories exist outside of normal Mechanicus structure, silent annexes as they are called. Here, experiments forbidden by Mars are performed daily. Cracked fragments of Dark Age STCs are analyzed by teams of magi who no longer pretend to understand their full meaning. The forbidden knowledge of ancient human empires, forgotten since the Long Night, is parsed line by line, word by word, by cogitators running logic cycles that take decades to complete. Many of these archives contain remnants of the Emperor's own hidden work. Records never fully erased, data caches buried by his agents during the Great Crusade and recovered by inquisitorial researchers over centuries. Fragments of old Terran techno-sorcery and warp modulation calculations that most of the Mechanicus refuse to acknowledge even exist. Using these dangerous pieces, teams have attempted direct repairs to certain secondary throne systems, stabilizer loops, nullification matrices, and plasma core regulators. Some of these attempts have succeeded, providing temporary relief to isolated subsystems. Others have failed catastrophically. One such attempt, centuries ago, resulted in a chain reaction that nearly detonated one of the throne's internal psychocrystal regulators. The resulting energy burst annihilated an entire level of the maintenance chambers, killing dozens of sacristans and corrupting nearby machine spirit logic cores. Had the custodians not intervened instantly, the entire containment field might have collapsed. Since that day, custodian oversight of any repair attempt has grown even more absolute. No unauthorized experiment proceeds without their watchful approval. Every contingency, every risk is calculated with surgical precision. Yet even the custodians recognize the necessity of these risks. The alternative is inevitable collapse. Not all forbidden efforts are limited to rediscovered human science. There are darker paths. Certain radical factions within the Inquisition, particularly the Xanthites and Polypsicana, have proposed and even pursued the study of Xenos technology as a possible key to stabilizing the throne. The Eldar, after all, constructed the webway that the Emperor sought to breach. Their mastery of extra-dimensional engineering far surpasses anything mankind now understands. Some inquisitors have secretly bargained with craft-world outcasts, pirate corsairs, and even agents of the mysterious Harlequins, offering prisoners, relics, or data in exchange for fragments of Eldar webway science. A few of these interactions have yielded data that appears, at least superficially, applicable to the Golden Throne's dimensional regulators. But every such exchange carries a price. Xenos knowledge is fundamentally alien and not fully compatible with human psychic architecture. Even when decoded, its integration into the throne's systems risks destabilizing the machine spirit's fragile programming. On several occasions, attempts to incorporate Eldar-derived phase stabilizers have produced unpredictable resonance anomalies, dimensional echoes that warp localized space, threatening to fracture the webway interface itself. Still, the research continues. Secret cells of inquisitors and rogue tech priests work under total isolation, knowing full well that discovery by the ecclesiarchy, or more puritanical inquisitorial factions, would mean immediate execution. Even more dangerous are the experiments that seek solutions from the warp itself. Certain Xanthite circles argue that since the throne's burden is primarily psychic, a battle against the warp, Then perhaps the key lies in manipulating warp energies directly. These heretics have experimented with summoning, binding, or siphoning demonic entities in controlled environments, seeking to weaponize their energy to reinforce the throne's containment fields. The risks are beyond measure. More than one hidden research station has been lost to catastrophic warp incursions after such experiments failed. Demons, once called forth, often refuse to be caged for long. The mere act of attempting to draw upon their power creates new microfractures in the veil, separating real space from the immaterium. Several entire inquisitorial cells have been wiped from existence by their own summoned abominations. The most radical proposals venture into theoretical madness. Some suggest that if the Emperor's psychic presence could be cloned, if a psychic avatar could be artificially grown, engineered from his gene seed, stabilized as a surrogate, it might carry some portion of his burden, lightening the load upon the throne. There have been rumors, never officially confirmed, of failed cloning attempts using harvested cells from the Emperor's pre-heresy relics. None of these experiments are known to have succeeded. Indeed, many believe the very concept of replicating the Emperor's soul is impossible. His power is not genetic alone, but transcendent, intertwined with the warp on a scale no machine can duplicate. Even so, fringe sects continue to search for biological pathways, exploring gene manipulation techniques outlawed since the Horus Heresy. These efforts are conducted in hidden laboratories scattered across the galaxy, far from Terra, where oversight is more easily avoided. In the deepest levels of the Imperial dungeon, beneath the feet of custodians who watch and wait, some whisper of one final, secret effort, known only to the most ancient magi and a handful of inquisitorial grand masters. A last experiment locked within the Emperor's own private chambers during the days of the Webway Project, long before the heresy. The Omega Vault, as it has been called in legend. If it exists at all, its contents remain sealed to this day, coded to the Emperor's personal biosignature, inaccessible to even the most high-ranking custodian or mechanicus magos. Some believe it holds a final design, a blueprint for rebuilding or replacing the throne should all else fail. Others believe it contains nothing but a final warning. No one dares open it. The custodians ensure that only the Emperor himself will ever activate that lock, if he ever stirs again. And so the desperate repair attempts continue, not as coordinated policy, but as 1,000 secret projects scattered across the Imperium, conducted by terrified minds willing to risk everything to delay the inevitable, because the final truth remains. The throne is failing. The Emperor cannot be freed, and no one, not priest, not inquisitor, not heretic, possesses the full answer. Not yet. The Golden Throne is a machine of silence. Its great engines hum with ancient power, its conduits pulse with distant energy, but within its sanctum, no words are spoken. The custodians stand like statues. The sacristans move in perfect, rehearsed ritual. The inquisitors who sometimes visit do so with bowed heads and sealed lips. The Emperor sits motionless, his desiccated form locked in eternal vigil. And yet, some say, he speaks. Not with words, not with breath. His mortal frame has long since withered into something unrecognizable as human. What remains on the throne is a relic of a man, fused to the great machine, his consciousness waging a war beyond the perception of ordinary mortals. But in the quiet spaces of the Imperium, in the hidden records of the Inquisition, the secret archives of the Astra Telepathica, the whispered confessions of wandering pilgrims, stories emerge. They call it the Emperor's Whisper. It begins with the Psychers. Those who stand closest to the throne during their final hours often report strange sensations before they are consumed. While some are too broken by terror or agony to perceive anything, a rare few speak of hearing a voice not audible in the air, but resonant within their minds. These moments are brief, fleeting, often indistinguishable from hallucination, but consistent enough to draw attention. I felt him inside me. One sacrificial psyker once screamed before the extraction device descended. He knew my name. Others describe visions, brief flashes of ancient battlefields, glimpses of stars long since extinguished, faces they do not recognize but somehow love. Some cry out in bliss as if embraced by something vast and merciful. Others shriek in terror as if confronting a mind so immense that their souls shatter in its presence. The sacristans dismiss these as psychic reflexes, death throes of minds unraveling as their life force is drained. But the Sisters of Silence have recorded many of these incidents in secret, puzzled by the consistency. These visions, though chaotic, often share common threads. Great wings of light, a golden tower rising above the stars, a voice that speaks in countless tongues, yet always carries a single message: endure. It is not only the sacrificial psychers who report these phenomena. Across the Imperium, saints have emerged who claim to have received direct visions from the Emperor. The ecclesiarchy embraces these saints, declaring them divine instruments of his will. Yet among these miracles, certain patterns disturb even the most devout cardinals. Some of the saints speak words that no one taught them, phrases from ancient Terran dialects long forgotten, military codes once used by the Emperor's personal forces during the Unification Wars, or fragments of the Dark Age lexicon. One particularly infamous saint, Euphrati Keeler, during the early years of the Great Crusade, claimed to hear the Emperor's voice directly during the darkest days of the Horus Heresy. Her revelations were recorded carefully by the first ecclesiarchs, but some of her later writings were sealed away by the Inquisition, deemed too dangerous for public release. More recently, pilgrims have journeyed to Terra itself and returned transformed, their minds burned clean by proximity to the throne, speaking with voices that do not seem entirely their own. Some offer prophecies, others speak in riddles. A few are found dead shortly after returning, their bodies burned from within, as though scorched by psychic fire. Even among the custodians, there are rare and unspoken stories. While they stand in silent vigil, some report feeling an oppressive presence, a vast awareness brushing against their thoughts like a distant sun warming the back of the mind. It is not speech as mortals know it. It is not even directed communication. Rather, it is something deeper, a pulse of will, a surge of thought vast enough to eclipse individual identity. Some custodians have stood before the throne and emerged haunted. A handful have entered long contemplative exiles afterward, their minds occupied with questions they cannot answer. What they sensed, whether it was the Emperor, the residual echoes of his former self, or something entirely different, remains their private burden. The Astra Telepathica maintains extensive records on psychic disturbances linked to the throne. Astropaths occasionally report anomalies while synchronized to the Astronomicon. These are not mere fluctuations of light or psychic static. Instead, they describe sudden floods of imagery, immense golden structures, planetary systems swirling in unnatural configurations, or entire scenes from humanity's distant past. Some see visions of the Primarchs, others glimpse wars that have not yet occurred. Many of these astropaths emerge from these events permanently damaged, their minds burned out by contact with something vast and incomprehensible. The Telepathica refers to these incidents clinically as Astronomicon cognitive spikes, another bureaucratic name to hide the deeper truth, that the Emperor may not be entirely silent. And then there are the miracles that defy classification. During times of great peril, isolated reports emerge from distant battlefields. Space Marines facing impossible odds speak of a sudden surge of strength, a guiding hand that turns the course of battle. Entire regiments of the Astra Militarum report hearing a great voice in their minds, directing them toward unseen dangers or paths to salvation. These moments are brief, impossible to verify, and dismissed by most as battlefield hysteria. But among the Adeptus Astartes, especially certain chapters whose gene lineage ties back to the Emperor's original work, such moments are remembered as sacred. The Grey Knights, most of all, are intimately familiar with this phenomenon. As the Emperor's secret demon hunters, their very creation was sanctioned by his own hand during the final days of the heresy. Among their most senior Grand Masters, there are hushed accounts of direct communion, of moments when the Emperor's will has surged through them like a living flame during the most desperate battles against the ruinous powers. Whether these moments are true communication or simply echoes of his will embedded within their gene code, none can say. But they are treated with the utmost reverence and fear. The Ecclesiarchy, for its part, maintains that the Emperor's mind is ever watchful, always guiding his people, even if unseen. Officially, all such reports are simply the natural consequence of his divine presence. But among the more inquisitive scholars of the Inquisition, the truth is far more unsettling. What if the Emperor is not fully gone? What if his consciousness, fragmented though it may be, stirs occasionally within the prison of the Golden Throne? What if he is aware, trapped and struggling to awaken fully? And what if the increasing frequency of these whispers signals something greater approaching? Not salvation, but transformation. The implications are terrifying. If the Emperor's soul is trying to break free, then every moment the throne continues to operate may not simply sustain him, but also restrain him. Perhaps the throne, once his great tool, has become his cage, and perhaps when it finally fails, his consciousness will be released in full, as the Star Child, as a new god, or as something entirely unknown. Or perhaps the throne's collapse will mean oblivion, and these whispers are nothing more than the death throes of a mind stretched to its absolute limits. None can say. And so, for now, the Emperor sits upon his throne, silent, unmoving, but not, perhaps, entirely asleep. For 10,000 years, the Imperium staggered forward under the shadow of its own decay. The Golden Throne groaned, the Emperor endured, and the Imperium bled, one world at a time, trapped in a slow-motion collapse. Every passing century brought greater rot, greater darkness, and greater weight upon the shoulders of those sworn to preserve the unyielding edifice of mankind's survival. And then, against all expectation, Robut Guilliman returned. It was not a return predicted by the High Lords of Terra. It was not arranged by the Ecclesiarchy. It was not sanctioned by the Mechanicus. It was not, by any measure, part of any plan. It was a miracle, and yet, like all miracles, it brought as much fear as hope. When the Primarch of the Ultramarines awakened, reborn through the heretical genius of Archmagos Belisarius Cawl and the divine intervention of Saint Celestine, the entire balance of power across the Imperium shifted. Robuti Guilliman, the only surviving loyal son of the Emperor, stood once more beneath the vaulted heavens of the Imperial Palace. His resurrection was an event that rippled across every echelon of power, from the lowest serf to the most secretive inquisitorial conclave. Yet for Guilliman himself, his resurrection was no triumph. He awoke into a galaxy far darker than the one he had left. The Imperium he had sacrificed his life to build was unrecognizable. Its grandeur was buried beneath mountains of corruption, inefficiency, fanaticism, and blind devotion. The Ecclesiarchy had elevated the Emperor to godhood, a title the Emperor had never sought. The High Lords had calcified into an ossified political body, paralyzed by fear and self-interest. And at the center of it all, deeper than any of them truly understood, sat the Golden Throne. The Emperor, bound and broken, yet still the sole reason the Imperium had survived. The throne was the first place Guilliman was brought. The custodians led him through the labyrinth beneath the palace, through the silent halls of the imperial dungeon, to the sanctum none but they could enter freely. The sacristans stood in mute reverence. The Sisters of Silence formed a psychic barrier around the chamber, muting the constant warp thrum that radiated from the failing breach behind the throne. Guilliman beheld his father's remains for the first time in 10,000 years. It is said, though few know the truth, that the sight nearly broke him. The last time he had seen the Emperor, the master of mankind had walked among them as a god of flesh, power, and perfect will. Now he was a shriveled husk, fused into the golden throne, barely recognizable as human. The vast machine groaned with every breath it borrowed from countless sacrificed psychers. The air itself shimmered under the constant strain of the warp breach, held at bay by his fading will. For a time, Guilliman simply stood in silence, processing the unbearable weight of what he saw. When at last he spoke, his words were recorded only by the custodians. No others were permitted to bear witness. "My father," he whispered, "what have they done to you?" Yet, as he stood before the throne, something else occurred, something not in the record of the custodians or the sacristans, but whispered in the deepest chambers of the Inquisition. Guilliman heard him, not as words, not as voice, but as presence. A flicker of awareness, a surge of familiarity, a pulse of psychic recognition that cut through the layers of silence that had covered the Emperor for millennia. For a single moment, father and son connected, not in dialogue, but in the shared understanding that both still endured. Whether this was an intentional act by the Emperor or merely an echo of his eternal battle against the warp, none can say. But the moment shook Guilliman to his core. It galvanized his resolve, but also haunted him. The Emperor was not dead, but he was trapped, and still very much at war. Following this encounter, Guilliman resumed his role as a leader of the Imperium, but he did so with a heavy burden. He accepted the role of Lord Commander of the Imperium, not as a conqueror returning to glory, but as a steward standing guard over a crumbling empire. The crisis of the Golden Throne remained ever at the forefront of his concerns. He reviewed the reports of the sacristans personally. He met with the senior magi of the cult of the throne. He interrogated the High Magos Dominus of Mars regarding forbidden repair projects. He authorized previously concealed inquisitorial research cells to continue their investigations under the watchful eye of the custodians. Guilliman understood what many dared not speak aloud, that the Golden Throne was failing faster than the Imperium would admit. The discovery of the Great Rift, the Cicatrix Maledictum, only compounded the urgency. With the Imperium divided, half of humanity now struggled under the nightmare of the Imperium Nihilus, where even the Astronomican's light could not always reach. The throne's failing systems could no longer fully illuminate all of mankind's domain. Warp storms surged unpredictably, and every flare within the Astronomican mirrored a deepening instability beneath Terra. Guilliman's reforms were swift and brutal. The Primaris Marines were deployed in countless new chapters to stabilize vulnerable worlds. The Indomitus Crusade was launched to restore order across the scattered, fractured Imperium. Entire Mechanicus forges were repurposed to focus on technologies long banned, all in the hope of shoring up what remained of the Emperor's domain. Yet for all his power, all his wisdom, even Robut Guilliman was unable to halt the slow decay of the Golden Throne itself. The deeper he investigated, the clearer it became. There was no true solution. The original knowledge of the throne's construction was lost even to him. The experiments being conducted by the Mechanicus, by radical inquisitors, by desperate researchers, were buying time, but not reversing the inevitable. In private councils with the custodians, Guilliman expressed his darkest fear, that the Emperor, in his current state, was holding on only to give humanity a few more centuries to prepare, not for survival, but for the moment of his final release. Whether that release would result in the Star Child's ascension or the annihilation of Terra itself remained the question no one dared answer. Guilliman often visited the throne in solitude. The custodians permitted these private audiences. In those silent moments beneath the ancient vaults, the Lord Commander would stand before his father's broken form and speak, though he knew no reply would come. He spoke of the wars beyond the stars, of the Imperium's struggles and its triumphs, of the enemies gathering in the dark, of the hope that still flickered, however faintly, and perhaps in some distant corner of the warp where the Emperor's mind waged its eternal battle. Those words reached him. For Guilliman, even knowing that no reply would come, it was enough. Because while the Golden Throne groaned under the weight of its failing systems, while the Psyche tithe continued, while the Inquisition gambled in secret, and while the custodians guarded their master's prison, the Emperor endured. And so too would his son. For now, beneath the highest spires of the imperial palace, deeper than the cathedrals of the ecclesiarchy, lower than even the forgotten foundations of ancient Terra, the chamber remains unchanged. The throne sits at the heart of a machine that was never meant to exist, and yet it persists. The custodians remain, their golden forms unmoved, standing as they have for 10 millennia, weapons silent but ready. The sacristans continue their endless labor, chanting sacred litanies as they patch failing conduits and replace what pieces they still can. The Sisters of Silence maintain their vigil, nullifying the constant psychic turbulence that radiates from the Emperor's eternal struggle. Above them all, the Emperor remains fixed upon his throne, the greatest paradox of the Imperium. He is dead, and yet he lives. He is silent, and yet he speaks through miracles. He is immobile, and yet his mind wages a war across the plains of reality. For 10,000 years, humanity has walked the edge of annihilation, surviving only because the Emperor endures upon the throne. The Astronomicon still burns, though it flickers. The warp breach behind the throne remains sealed, though only barely. The throne's ancient systems function, though each day they grow more fragile. And yet, despite all efforts, all desperation, the crisis has not been solved, only delayed. Every day is another borrowed victory. The Psyche tithe continues, an endless river of souls offered to sustain the Emperor's failing body and the throne's decaying mechanisms. Black ships drift silently across the stars, gathering their grim harvest. On Terra, the sacristans feed each soul into the throne's hungry conduits, buying a few more precious hours of stability. The Adeptus Mechanicus, in their sealed vaults, labor over ancient texts and lost technologies, praying for impossible solutions. Their experiments grow more heretical with every passing century, but they have little choice. Knowledge has been lost. The secrets of the throne's original construction have slipped beyond their grasp, and even their most radical attempts to stabilize its failing structure grow less effective with each generation. The Inquisition, always watching, wages its shadow war within the Imperium itself. Some factions still pursue forbidden knowledge in secret, seeking salvation through means that would horrify the ecclesiarchy if exposed. Others debate whether the throne should be allowed to fail entirely, believing the Star Child theory offers hope beyond the prison of endless sacrifice. But none have answers, and none dare act. The ecclesiarchy continues its great lie, for it has no other option. They proclaim that the Emperor reigns still, unchanging, eternal, perfect, that the sacrifices are pleasing to him, that the Imperium's triumphs are signs of his favor. The masses believe because they must. The truth would shatter them. Billions live and die without ever knowing the knife's edge upon which their very existence balances. Gilliman remains the lone Primarch, now burdened with the impossible task of holding the Imperium together. His reforms have slowed the collapse, but they have not halted it. His knowledge of the throne's failing state haunts him, even as he wages war across the divided galaxy. He knows time is running out, and still the Golden Throne endures. But for how much longer? There are calculations, secret, classified projections buried within Mechanicus archives and inquisitorial vaults. They predict the remaining lifespan of the throne with cold precision, based on power fluctuations, crystal fractures, and increasing failure rates in subsystems no longer understood. These projections do not offer hope. They offer deadlines, centuries, perhaps a few millennia at most. In Imperial terms, it is the blink of an eye. When the throne finally fails, not if, but when, the consequences will be apocalyptic. The first to fall will be the containment gates behind the throne, the dimensional breach into the webway, barely held in check by the Emperor's will burst open, unleashing the horrors that have waited behind its fractured veil for 10,000 years. Demonic legions will pour into the Imperial Palace itself. Terra, the throne world of mankind, will become a new Eye of Terror. Without the Astronomicon, warp travel across the Imperium will collapse. Entire sectors will vanish into isolation or annihilation. The Imperium will fracture, its distant worlds left defenseless against Xenos incursions, civil war, and demonic corruption. The billion worlds of mankind will tear themselves apart in the wake of their god's collapse. And if the Emperor's soul is not released, if his mind is not able to ascend as the Star Child theorists hope, then he too may be consumed, not reborn, but devoured by the ruinous powers he has resisted for so long. The fall of the throne will not be an event, it will be the end. And yet, the vigil continues. The custodians remain at their posts, unwavering. They have rehearsed the final protocols, should the worst occur. The Talisman of 7 Hammers, the Emperor's last failsafe, remains armed deep beneath the throne, ready to obliterate Terra itself rather than allow his body to be profaned. The Inquisition prepares its contingency plans, scattered across secret vaults and hidden worlds. The Astra Telepathica continues to train sanctioned psychers for the day their gift will be called upon to delay the inevitable. The Mechanicus sends its explorator fleets ever deeper into unknown space, seeking one final miracle lost in the void, and the Emperor sits, watching, waiting. Locked in an unending struggle beyond mortal comprehension, his will stretched across both the material and immaterial. For 10,000 years he has held back the end, not with the might of armies or fleets, but with a mind that refuses to break. His war is invisible, but its stakes encompass the fate of mankind itself. The great vigil is not yet broken, but its end is coming. One day, perhaps soon, the last sacrifice will be made. The last crystal will shatter. The last stabilizer will flicker and die. The final barrier will fall. And when that moment arrives, all that has come before, the 10,000 years of struggle, faith, heresy, sacrifice, and silence, will culminate in a final question. Will the Emperor fall into oblivion, or will he rise at last into godhood? The answer is not yet written, and so the last vigil continues. The throne endures. The Emperor endures. For now,